Okay, so I think we're going to be starting again. We have some fantastic presentations that we're going to be making now, in theory. Can we start again, please? We need to... Thank you. That's great. So, my name is Peter Leese. I am also a member of Cultmind, social cultural historian. Please come and talk to me if you want more details. We are going to have a panel this afternoon that I'm very much looking forward to. And I think the title actually reflects the conversation that we've already had this morning, meaning cross-cultural encounters with mental health. Definitely a theme already there. We have 4 presentations, and I think that we will just move through them as we did previously, each group. I will minimize the kind of opening comments for each one, just to leave individuals and groups to say more if they want to about themselves and what they're presenting. And yeah, why don't we just begin? So the first group, the first is a group, okay? So this is a group of 4 from the Centre for Aboriginal Studies at Curtin University. And why don't I just hand over to you guys, okay? Let's do it this way. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon. We're happy to be here. My name is Rae-Lee Warner. I'm a Nyingana, Walmatjari and Jaru girl from the Kimberley region of Western Australia. If you ever know where that is, it's a little town in Derby that I'm from. A lot of people know Broome, so it's a couple of hours past Broome. I'm also a lecturer and academic at the Centre for Aboriginal Studies and currently the Interim Deputy Director. So we are introducing today the therapeutic modalities of an Indigenous mental health course on healing from historical trauma. So we'll talk through that for you today. But before then...
Thanks, Rae-Lee. Hi everyone, my name's Carolyn Griffin. I'm a lecturer at the Centre for Aboriginal Studies as well. I'm born and raised in Darwin, Northern Territory, and I'm of Warlpiri Gurindji descent, which is around Central Australia in the Northern Territory. But before we start, I should do the acknowledgement. So on behalf of Curtin University and the Centre of Aboriginal Studies, we respectfully acknowledge the elders and custodians of the Denmark Nation, past and present, their descendants and kin.
Hello everyone. Kaya, which is a Noongar word where I have come from, like where I have been living. I'm originally from Bangladesh, but I have been living in Western Australia for the past almost 20 years. I'm a senior lecturer at the Centre for Aboriginal Studies, and I'll be presenting after, everyone. So we have the slots.
Hi everyone, my name is Fred Yasso. I'm a lecturer, but I'm also have the privilege of being the director for the Centre for Aboriginal Studies. I'm a Juru man from North Queensland. That Juru country is where I was born and raised in my first years of living, which is the land of my mother, her grandmother, her mother before, and so on and so forth. My father's people are from Central Queensland, Woolly Woolly country and Usman Nation. So I'm going to begin the actual slides. Hopefully it works. My voice is, there we go. It's cool. Well, so I also have to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people whose land that we all learn and live on. In where Curtin University is situated, and acknowledge those elders past, present and emerging in those space. So I have the honour of talking about culture in a sort of a broad sense to understand Aboriginal culture. And you have to understand that Aboriginal culture is very diverse. And the people from all over Australia have different languages and different ways of being, but I'm going to talk about what permeates a commonality that permeates through, and that is around the fact that over the 60,000 years, the main feature of our culture has been about land and country, okay? And we view land as a living entity. It's actually even incorporated into our language. Like, for example, in Noongar elder Nick Abraham talks about how the language of, the Noongar language uses terms like, when we talk about the sun, it's, in Noongar, it's nyak. But the sun is the life giver, and nyak is also the term in Noongar for mother. So the term for country, or budja, as you see there, which means country, also relates to pregnancy. Where a woman is pregnant, she's budjari. So our language and our culture is centrally based around country, and it's why we were able to live in the space. So, you know, like, we have the knowledge holders for Juru country. They have a very unique and quite detailed understanding of where I come from, a little town called Bowen. So we understand the way of the environment, the way the fish that's in the area, the kangaroos, the animals, the plants. We understand how it travels through time, how it changes, and how we as a people engage in that process. So I was taught by my elders that the creation beings that created the land also created the laws. So we have stories of creation like many peoples around the world, but our stories start with the creation of the creation beings coming through and creating the land and the waterways. And also, as part of those stories, those creation beings also set out laws that we must all abide by. These laws are still etched into the land. So they are retold in our songs and our stories and our dance. And they tell of the past, of what's happened previously, of the creation of that land, of what's happened on that land. They give us an insight into the present of how we are supposed to be acting and actually to be part of that country, and how we are supposed to acknowledge that country. And also it can foretell a future. So it can tell, if you do certain things, that the future of your community or your people is positive. This term of caring for country is a reciprocal. So we talk about reciprocity. It's a philosophy which is that is told by our ancestors, is a process by which there's always a giving, right? So a reciprocity is not transactional, as I'm going to give you something and then you get something back. It's always a reciprocity to me, as I was told to my elders tell me, is that you give. Not expecting anything back, always giving. It's always a positivity, so giving positivity to country, and that we know that it will return it back to you. So the way we do this is enacted through a simple philosophy of care and responsibility, having care for country, and being responsible for it, and having care for each other, and being responsible for each other. So this process means that our country will always be there to protect and nurture us. And so how does this relate to what we're talking about today? This culture helps us ground us in who we are, and we are never lost. So last night I had the opportunity to talk to some students around stories, and I want to share a quick story with you before to end off the thing, which is a story I didn't share last night, but it's part of the same article. It was written by Eveline Molina, who's a Pilbara woman from Baigu and Nyamal people in the Pilbara. So it's the story of the lost girl. The girl had lost her way. She had wandered far from the mothers and the aunties and the grandmothers, from the fathers and the uncles and the grandfathers. She had hidden in the shadow of a rock and fallen asleep while she waited for her brothers and sisters to find her. Now it was night, and no one answered. When she called, she could not find her way back to camp. She wandered alone, she grew thirsty, so she stopped by a waterhole to drink, and then hungry, so she picked some berries from a bush. Then the night grew colder, so she huddled beneath an overhanging rock, pressing herself into a hollow that has trapped the warm air of the day. Finally, she saw a crow flying in the moonlight. flapping the tree from tree to tree and calling, caw, caw, caw. The girl followed the crow. She followed him through the trees and over the rocks and up the hills, and until the last she saw the glow of the people's campfire in the distance. The people laughed and cried at once to see that the girl was safe. They growled at her for her foolishness and cuddled her and gave her a place by the fire. Her little brother asked her if she had been afraid, but the girl said, "How could I be frightened? I was with my mother. When I was thirsty, she gave me water. When I was hungry, she fed me. And when I was cold, she warmed me. And when I was lost, she showed me the way home."
Do I go to the next one? How do I go? Okay, I'm going to share a bit about relationship and identity. And like Fred said, traditionally Aboriginal culture and health have been present in Australia for the past 65,000 plus years. So Aboriginal people who survived infancy were relatively fit and disease-free. Australia's bush foods supported a nutritious, balanced diet of protein and vegetables with adequate vitamins and minerals. And the life on the land for the people moving, it actually kept them physically fit. So in terms of mental health or social emotional well-being, traditional healers had extensive knowledge and were able to interpret symptoms and provide traditional healing treatments, including bush rubs and medicines. Aboriginal sense of self was seen in a collective sense, connected to all aspects of life: community, spirituality, culture and country. Culture also provided for everyone by sharing rules and understanding relationships. Aboriginal people's family structure is based on kinship, which structures relationships, obligations and behaviours of Aboriginal people. It also influences marriage, death, responsibilities, misdeeds, and who cares for the elderly or sick. In the kinship setting, family structure is crucial to identity formation. Aboriginal people were also given a sense of meaning and understanding of life experience through their connection to their country and their dreaming. Spiritual belief offered guidance, comfort, and held a sense of connectivity and belonging despite distress, death, and loss. Aboriginal spirituality is totemic. So a totem is a natural object, plant, or animal that members of a clan or family inherit as their spiritual emblem. Totems define people's roles, responsibilities, and their relationships with each other and creation. Totems are believed to be the descendants of the Dreamtime heroes and are linked to space and place. So each clan family belonging to the group is responsible for taking care of their totem. That is the flora and fauna of their area and the protection of the sacred sites attached to them. So a typical child's story might begin before he or she is even born, as his or her mother becomes conscious of his first movement in the womb. And the mother immediately has to take note of the area so that the infant will become identified with the spirit of that particular area in which she is located. The belief is the spirit of that area. The belief is the spirit of that area has energised the infant in the womb. The child then becomes linked with the spirit associated with the dominant creation of that place and as his or her conception totem. So law, Aboriginal law, which is L-O-R-E, not L-A-W, it's the body of knowledge that defines a culture and was highly valued as were the tribal elders who contained and interpreted the law. Oh, the love of law. So how I wrote it, it looked like a V. Customary law defined rules and consequences. So over 200 traditional languages and other methods of communication allowed a rich expression of interaction in this social context, and formal ceremony enabled a method of dealing with life's transitions through birth, initiations and death. Central to Aboriginal people's culture is the separation of men's and women's business. This is not a discriminatory or sexist separation. Instead, it focuses on particular roles, ceremonies and law that are specific and sacred to men and women individually. Children were well protected within the group, with a range of aunties and older siblings able to take over the childcare role should the mother have other communal responsibilities or was stressed. So the concepts mean that Aboriginal society, before European contact, provided the optimal conditions for mental health and social and emotional well-being that have been noticeable in later documents, such as Ways Forward by Swan and Raphael, 1995. And Swan and Raphael comment that the Aboriginal concept of health is holistic, encompassing mental health and physical, cultural and spiritual health. This holistic concept does not just refer to the whole body, but is in fact steeped in harmonised interrelations which constitute cultural well-being. These interrelating factors can be categorised largely into spiritual, environmental, ideological, political, social, economic, mental and physical. So crucially, it must be understood that when the harmony of these interrelations is disrupted, Aboriginal ill health will persist.
Okay. So I'm just going to touch on the impacts of colonisation because, we are a colonised country in Australia, 200 plus years. So obviously what Fred and Carolyn have been talking about have been our culture, pre-colonisation, but also post-colonisation, or rather we're still colonised. So it is still within our culture now, however it's been disfragmented due to colonisation. And so in 1788, the first fleets came and settled on the 26th of January. So really what I'd like you to take away from this is the visual images that I see. So these are strong Aboriginal men. I just didn't have any pictures of the females at this stage. It's not a gender-based aspect, but you can see how strong the culture was and the people were and how healthy we were. And then have a look at the impact of colonisation. And what actually occurred and started to occur for at least 150 years prior to us actually having some rights in 1967. So, life was good prior to that. However, afterwards, we were chained up. We were massacred, lots of massacres, lots of diseases came to Australia, and our life was pretty much, great. Finished as we understood it, except we still practiced our culture where we could. And then there was the assimilation policies of the 1930s, okay? And that led to the stolen generations, so children being removed from their families and put into missions and reserves. And, the idea was that we would only identify as being Australian, not as being Aboriginal. That didn't succeed, thankfully. It did do a lot of damage, though. And so what we bring now is the impact and how we navigate that. And so we talk about Indigenous terms of reference, which is a process that we follow, and through our decision-making processes. We also talk about the third space, which we need to live in now, and it's a negotiation as well of being able to live in the modern world but still keep our culture. So I'm going to finish there because we are nearly finished and hand you over to Shaouli.
Sorry, I have very little time. I probably just quickly glances through the slides so that at least it gives you some perspective of what are the things that we do as part of, because we are educational institute, but how through education we address the mental health and how it plays as a therapy. So our course is called Indigenous Australian Mental Health Principles and Practice, but that is just one course. We have other courses that we also offer, and that Indigenous terms of reference and all those principles and processes guide us through this delivery of our everything, like teaching styles, learning activities, programs of study, learning environment. Everything is guided by the Indigenous pedagogy and some parts of the 8 ways of Aboriginal ways of learning. And I could have gone a bit far and explain a bit more. The DD is a concept. We use a lot of concepts that is based on Indigenous pedagogies. The DD, which is deep listening, and it's very much embedded in the relationship with country. We embed that within our curriculum. The other one is we do a lot of yarning and yarning circles as a mode of learning environment, and that helps people to sort of, learn from each other's experiences, but also sharing a lot of reflexive practices and their stories of life and experiences within each other among the groups. I could not play the video because of the time. Is that okay? Storytelling is something that we incorporate. We take the students to on-country to have that on-country experiences so that they feel much safer within that context of and connection. Again, back to the country and culture, which is a significant part of the curriculum. So this is just some of the works that the students have produced. We have just picked a couple because of the time. And as the student was just talking about her life and how, just by talking about her life and being reflective about it from a strengths-based approach, she was sharing how it has impacted her. She has kind of understood the resilience that she has been dealing with in all her life, and helped her to come and learn about Indigenous mental health, not only from the individual perspectives, but as a community perspective as well. And this is just a poster that one of our prison students produced. This is amazing artwork. We were just given the topic of depression, and he just came up with this amazing connection to country, culture, and what it means to him. And in the end, he just mentioned that how this exercise helped him to feeling more empowered and to have the purpose of life, and he wants to do some more work within the prison setting with other prisoners to deal with depression and mental health illnesses and issues. So this is just a very, very brief overview, and could not even cover many of the things, but thank you for listening to us.
Thank you so much, Usman. I think it's really interesting to have this movement between a kind of large-scale, kind of discussion of a cultural scene and particular belief sets, and then shrink it down to this individual case. So we will move on, and I will say welcome to Peter Keppy and Eveline Buchheim, who are from the Institute for War, Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Amsterdam. and the title of their talk, Between Trauma and Suffering, Explaining Cross-Cultural Comparisons.
Thank you, Peter. Actually, the title is different. We changed it. I'm very much in the process of developing a research project on trauma. My expertise actually is in popular culture studies and mass violence. And I did research on Southeast Asia, particularly Indonesia, also in a historical perspective. Last year we had my colleagues, among Eveline and I and others, organized a small conference or workshop in Leiden in the Netherlands on trauma to explore the topic. One of the invitees and participants was Peter. So thanks for inviting us here. Originally we planned to have separate presentations. So Eveline would say something on her own projects on psychiatry in the Netherlands or on diaries of Dutch war veterans who fought in the Indonesian War of Independence. Is that correct? Yeah. But due to the time slot, we decided to join hands and present something together. I will do much of the talking and say something about the project I hope to develop. As you can see, well, this is the new title, which does not correspond with the program. Let me start. I've been working on a manuscript. Like I said, I've been working on mass violence, and one of the books I'm working on, trying to finish, probably very familiar to you. A book takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. It's on vigilantism and the rise of civil militias in Central Java in the early 1950s, shortly after Indonesia became independent. And while I was doing the research, I came across a motion picture from the early 1950s. I think I have to push a button, right? How does it work?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. Well, it was produced in 1954. In 1955, this film, Lewat Jam Malam, After the Curfew, was screened on the first Indonesian Film Festival ever organized in Indonesia in 1955, in the capital of Jakarta. This picture tells the dramatic story of a guerrilla fighter by the name of Iskandar. Well, like I said, Indonesia had achieved independence from the Dutch, yet the main protagonist, Iskandar, is unable to adapt to a civilian life. He experienced people biases that former freedom fighters are violently inclined people, receiving privileges from the new Indonesian state. He's very disappointed. He perceives his co-patriots as shallow, unreliable, etc. And moreover, during the struggle for independence, Iskandar's commanding officer had ordered him to kill a woman, suspected of collaborating with the Dutch. And eventually, in the post-conflict situation, Iskandar finds out that this suspicion was a mere excuse for his criminally inclined commander to amass the lady's wealth. So in the post-colonial situation, the former commander lives a comfortable life and continues to engage in shady business activities. And tormented and outraged by the guilt of having taken the life of an innocent woman, Iskandar seeks justice. He kills his former commander, and in turn, on the run, Iskandar meets his fate during curfew. So, this is more or less the storyline. After the curfew was created by two people, it was created by more people, but they were central. It was the two writer, filmmakers, former freedom fighters themselves, named Asrul Sani and Usman Ismail. They had risen during the Japanese occupation of Indonesia between 1942 and 45 as writers. The Japanese were very much stimulating Indonesians to write, from poetry to short stories, and they came up as a kind of new generation. And then the revolution broke out, and then they basically continued writing, but also, actually fighting against the Dutch. And shortly after when independence was achieved in 1949, Usman was given the opportunity to go to Hollywood and other places to be trained as a filmmaker. Well, this film was awarded the best film at the film festival, the first film festival in Jakarta in 1955, and is nowadays considered a kind of classic in Indonesian film history. For a realism that illustrates the nuanced complexities of war, revolution, and morality. This might be true, but these official acclaims conceal the important fact that at the time, so in the early 50s or mid 50s, the film was controversial in Indonesia. And I found one letter in a local newspaper, someone saying that he blamed director Usman Ismail for publicly degrading the revolutionary youth's reputation as debased youngsters engaging in gambling, petty crime, and frequenting prostitutes. And also, although it was an award-winning film, the Indonesian government decided not to send this film to the next year, so 1956 Asian Film Festival in Singapore. After the curfew revealed a kind of dark side of Indonesia's hard-won national revolution. Through a popular culture medium, the film exposed the slow violence of dissolution among Indonesians with post-colonial social and political conditions and also economic conditions. The two filmmakers publicly questioned the outcome of the revolution. They challenged the dominant hegemonic nationalist narrative of revolutionary heroism and its inherent masculinity. Guerrilla fighters proved vulnerable and even tormented people. The storyline of Iskandar, of the so-called hero, went against conventional storytelling in Indonesian cinema. The main protagonist blurred the divide between victim and perpetrator. A happy end is conspicuously missing. The ambiguous hero dies. Now, making human weaknesses and disillusions of former freedom fighters visible before a mass audience, because this film was screened across Indonesia, meant like breaching a public secret. And this public secret was that there's an invisible backdrop in this film, and that is the social political turmoil in Indonesia of the early 1950s. So around 500,000 Indonesian former freedom fighters returned to society. A society they had violently helped to transform from a Dutch colony to a sovereign republic of Indonesia. Many of the guerrillas refused to give up their guns and joined political criminal gangs. Others, many unemployed or underemployed, organized into veteran organizations, claiming material and immaterial privileges from the state for the sacrifices they had made. And violence continued throughout the 1950s. and this explains the wide occurrence of curfews. Now, Indonesian moviegoers were familiar with the situation, so they knew about the insecurity, especially in rural areas. So, as audiences, they needed little explanation. So, what can we learn from my brief reading from this film? I think this film, and I should emphasize, there's more of them, not many. I guess around 10 of these similar movies made in a similar period, basically between 52 and 57. I think they help us to understand the experience of trauma cross-culturally. And I've been particularly inspired by the work of first Rob Nixon and then later on Joshua Pedersen. And this brings me to the conceptual approach I hope to develop, and we'll see where it goes. I think what people saw, or what we can see in the film after the curfew, is what Rob Nixon, in his compelling book Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor, labels slow violence. And to quote him, a violence of delayed destruction that is dispersed across time and space, that is typically not viewed as violence at all. Now, Nixon deals with environmental disasters, ecological destruction, and displacement of large groups of people in the wake of wars, top-down state development projects like big dam projects, and also devastating operations of international corporations, especially oil companies. Nixon says that slow violence is a variety of social afflictions, from domestic abuse to post-traumatic stress and, in particular, environmental calamities. Well, Nixon catches the elusive violence of delayed effects by focusing on literature, novels, short stories, etc., produced by people he calls the facts figure of the environmental writer-activist. And these writer-activists modeled their fictional stories after real events of ecological destruction that ruin local communities. And some of the writers are general activists advocating social justice for their own local communities. Some face powerful transnational corporations that ally with autocratic regimes that do not shun violence. And one of these activists discussed by Nixon is Ken Saro-Wiwa from Nigeria, who was executed on charges of murder. But there's many others he discussed. Nixon's idea of delayed violence as represented in novels is appealing. But my concern is not environmental destruction. And moreover, I'm not sure whether post-traumatic stress disorder is the most useful concept to analyze and understand what I for now call the experience of trauma. And even more so if the people concerned are perpetrators of violence. I recently read the book by Joshua Pedersen, Sin Sick, Moral Injury and Literature. And this came kind of to my rescue. Well, we have to see whether it's true or not, but for now it is. Like Nixon, Pedersen digs into literary fiction to capture the invisible, and this time the pain of perpetrators. And Pedersen carefully moves away from the narrow concept of PTSD, and he engaged in a very fruitful discussion on what he calls moral injury. And people before him. Well, he was inspired. What was the name? Brett Litz, who was the originator of the term, I guess. Anyway, so he defines moral jury as the enduring psychic pain that may afflict someone who either commits or witnesses a significant moral transgression. And he distinguishes 4 symptoms of moral injury: rage, social isolation, poor self-care, and negative self-evaluation. Okay, the cross-validity of these symptoms is still to be tested. Still, I think it's a good starting point for me, and I would like to give the word to Eveline, who's getting very nervous, even more nervous than I already was, I guess.
No, it's not a matter of nervousness, but we want to keep to the time. Well, I think that, as Peter explained, after the curfew is a very good example of the complex ways in which a conflict is remembered and represented. Because it shows the friction between 2 competing narratives, how the Indonesian revolution ideally should be remembered and how it has been presented on the level of the national, mainly focusing on heroes, with, as Peter already mentioned, also a focus on the inherent masculinity that leads to a very gendered representation. And on the other hand, how that period is remembered and relived at personal levels, which consists of a plethora of different emotions, narratives that also change over time. So it's basically a combination of very contrasting feelings, emotions, representations. And basically, by focusing on the traumatic experiences of the protagonist, the heroic aspect is not only glossed over, but even worse, it is corroded and undermined. So the overarching question, I think, that we want to tackle here is how can popular culture help in explaining trauma, moral injury, and how can it help in dealing with healing moral injury? Which, as you can imagine, is a rather ambitious idea. And it is a challenging question in many ways that directly bring us back to the title of this presentation, Capturing the Invisible. We might even add Capturing the Unspeakable. At this point, so the main challenge is that is a methodological one, because we want to roam in the intersections of the 3 points that you see here. And so we need first to understand the very complex notion of what trauma or moral injury is. To come back to the gendered element, it seems very unproductive also to understand trauma and making sense of how it manifests itself without applying the gendered lens. Then the popular culture, I'm speeding it up as you understand, the representation and re-articulation of trauma in popular culture and the ways in which the experience of the trauma or moral injury are made available is another, to a broader audience, is another point that needs a lot more attention. And particularly, I think the global consumption of popular culture brings along both restrictions and possibilities. And finally, the cross-cultural analysis is an important an important element, a dark animal, with many pitfalls. Not in the first place because of the Eurocenteredness, that is still very powerful, but also in relation to that we tend to generalize a lot about cross-cultural analysis, and of course the layeredness of experiences and how to account for them. I think we'll have to leave it at this.
Okay, thank you so much. There's such a lot to think about and talk about, and I hope we'll get into that discussion some more. For now, we will turn to our final speaker, Tiago Pires, who is at the Ethnographic Museum and Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. I hope the title is the same, we'll see. Culture and Psychopathology in Early Italian Ethnopsychiatry. Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to present briefly is about the beginning of ethnopsychiatry in Italy. So I'm going to present like the theoretical basis of this that fundament the ethnopsychiatry and transcultural psychiatry in Italy during the 50s, 60s, and so on. This is it's part of my postdoctoral research. I have a project that's about culture and subjectivity during the Cold War, and I am analyzing different case studies from Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and Global South, and I'm trying to identify from a global history perspective, history of ideas, and trying to understand how were the disconnections and connections between these ideas from different psychiatrists, psychanalysts, and anthropologists within the psy field. Because when you talk about ethnopsychiatry or cultural mental health, we are dealing not just with psychiatrists and psychanalysts, but also anthropologists. They start to be an important, anthropology had and has an important role in this process of incorporating culture in the mental health field. This project is part of a bigger project, the ERC Synergy, about history of medicine during the Cold War. So we're trying to investigate how, even during this moment of political conflicts, it was possible to cross the borders with ideas, and we're trying to analyze it through the lens of medicine. And my part in this project is the psy field, psychiatry, and other disciplines within this psy field. Culture, I believe that not just me, but I think we have a lot of interesting works in this direction, that culture and mental health and culture and subjectivity became a very important topic during the Cold War, during the second half of the 20th century, and it became a global topic. I cannot say that this discussion about culture and mental health, it started during the Cold War or the second half of the 20th century, but it became a global concern, not just for the World Health Organization with the studies of schizophrenia and so on, but also these other case studies that I'm analyzing where psychiatrists or ethnopsychiatrists, they start to think about that. I believe that they were kind of outsiders, because if I think about, at least in the Italian context or even the Brazilian context or other countries in Western Europe, when you have someone talking about ethnopsychiatry or transcultural psychiatry, they were kind of the outsiders, because the standard psychiatrists at the time, or I would provoke and say even nowadays, is very Anglo-Saxon. So it's really hard to question at the time, in these case studies show that they were trying to give another meanings, giving another interpretations, and try to question this standard psychiatry, which is very based on the, and still is based on the Anglo-Saxon world. So this was the he's Ernesto De Martino. He was an anthropologist, and he was the base, and still is the base, because ethnopsychiatry in Italy is not the mainstream now, but it's still very important there, and he was and still is the basis for the ethnopsychiatry. And I think there are three points in his theories that is important for my discussion. The first one is the importance of psychoanalysis and anthropology into this process. So in all my case studies, not just this one that I'm presenting, humanities or anthropology and psychoanalysis had an important role in this process of incorporating culture within the mental health field. So it's very interesting to analyze how they combine those two disciplines, also history, not just anthropology, but history, humanities in general. The second part of his theories is also switching for a universal explanation of the subjective suffering. I try to not use the mental disorder, because if I use a mental disorder, I am already using like the idioms of this Anglo-Saxon psychiatry, so I try to make it broader. So he switches from this, there are some universalism in his theory also, and also it's always contradictory, this relationship, but he switched more to this cultural specificity. So he was trying to investigate other languages for dealing with the subjective pain. This is his most important work, this ethnography that I will present for you. And the third point is like switching from these biological explanations of the mental disorders or the suffering and moving to a cultural reading of the psychic suffering. I think these are the 3 points that his work contributed in the past and for the history of psychiatry in Italy. So, I forgot. So in '59, he went to the southern Italy to investigate these tarantes. It's kind of a possession. I will explain with some pictures. I think it will be easier to understand. And the discussion at the time is that most of the anthropologists or even the doctors, the medicine, were interpreting this phenomenon as a primitive way of dealing with the subjective suffering or the psychic suffering. And De Martino proposed a different reading of this phenomenon, of this ritual, because he thought that it is not a primitive way of dealing with the problems of life, but as a legitimate subaltern strategy for dealing with reality, for dealing with the problems of life. So I think this is another movement into his theory, goes in this direction. And I think he was not I cannot say that he was a decolonial author. There are some people that believe it. I think it's too much to say that he was a decolonial author, but there is some elements of this decolonization of mental health because he was not putting the standard psychiatry as the only way to explain the mental disorders and the only way of treating this mental disorder or this suffering. So he was kind of doing this movement, so it's more a mediation and trying to identify that it's possible to find in different groups. That's the reason history is very important for his work. In different moments of history, in different groups, it's possible to identify different ways of dealing with the subjective pain. With different language and different... it's not just this translation, because it's not that these different groups, they will just translate what psychiatry was stating. They really create other idioms and other ways of dealing, and you need to understand this within this process, within this narrative, and not just translating the psychiatry into this cultural link. So it's more complex. So in '59, he created this transdisciplinary group to go to the southern Italy to investigate this ritual of tarantes. And he invited anthropologists, invited psychiatrists, ethnomusicologists to analyze what's going on there. So one of the questions, one of the main questions of this investigation was to see if this phenomenon is a cultural phenomenon or is a disease caused by the bite of a spider. So, and also this, it's not just about questioning his biological interpretation of the psychiatry, but also not pathologizing some rituals, because it was very common, not just in the 50s, even before, to pathologize this kind of rituals of exorcism and so on. So it's a case of hysteria and that's it. And he was not going this direction. He was not understanding this ritual as a pathology, not just a physical pathology, but also not as a mental illness, mental disorder. So it's kind of, at that time, he was criticizing this literature, and I think it was very early, because from what I remember, these discussions start to be more present in DSM-4. The fourth version, they already have this, they respect more this kind of rituals, they do not pathologize it. But the fourth version is from, I'm not sure, from the 1996, it's 96. So it's, and I'm talking about the end of the 50s, so there we have a huge gap. This research, this ethnography that he did was published in his book, The Land of Remorse, was published in '61. the cover of the book, and he investigates also the history of this ritual, how it's connected to ancient history during the Middle Ages and during modernity. I'm not gonna go because it's too long, this part. So I think one of the main questions that he was trying to respond is a pathology or is a cultural language? So the medical hypothesis, as I said, is that Tarantese is a disease caused by the bite of a spider. And De Martino started to question this perception because he realized that it's not about the poison of a spider. So I will try to explain. It's a very complex ritual. But usually the person, he's the kind of the exorcist. But before arriving this moment, the person feels that they were bitten by a spider. Usually they have a traumatic experience, or they are dealing with something that they cannot explain, cannot deal with very well. They cannot symbolize this experience. And from the partners leaving, or someone died, or there is a case where which a lady married a guy that she didn't want, for example. And from this not desired situation, or a traumatic situation, they feel that they were bitten by the spider. And they say that the cause of this suffering that comes after it is because of the spider, not because of the situation. So they start to transfer this subjective suffering into this narrative of the Tarantese. So this is part of the ethnography. It's like a visual ethnography. That's part of the material of De Martino. I'm not using as a source I'm using more the ethnography, but this is also in the book. So, and after the person was bitten by the spider, they start feeling anguish, they start feeling some depression symptoms, and they feel very agitated, and also with vomiting or pain in the stomach. So these symptoms, they can be related to the bite of the spider. So this was the medical explanation. Indeed, the bite of this kind of spider can cause these symptoms. But De Martino realized that when the person is bitten by the spider, they start dancing for hours, for days. And they just dance if they hire the specific musicians that will play a specific song. If you don't play the specific song to remove this spirit of the spider, they don't dance. Can I go back to? So you see, like the ladies, like in this, is sleeping, and then they start entering this trance state just if they play the song. So the bite of the spider cannot cause it for a long time. And also they repeat the symptoms every season, every summer. So he started questioning this medical explanation because it's not possible that the symptoms of the bite of the spider will last for weeks and repeat every year in the same moment. So these are the arguments that he used to question this pathologizing view of the medicine at the time, medicine, psychiatry at the time. So these are the findings. He interviewed like 19 cases, and none of them were bitten by the spider. I think there is one case that there is a real bite of the spider, but it's interesting because it's just a symbol. This first bite is just symbolical, because after some time, the poison is gone, but they enter into this narrative of the Tarantism. They start this kind of exorcism. So for De Martino, Tarantese offers a cultural model for dealing with these unsolved psychic conflicts. And the ritual is understood by him as a technique for resignifying and display. So you move your anguish, you move your trauma into this narrative, into this ritual, and you solve it in a collective way. Because this ritual of Tarantese, it's performed with with the people from the village, it's performed by the musician, and they help each other. So it's kind of a collective way to elaborate the suffering from a different language, from a cultural different language. But also De Martino was not denying psychiatry. So it's very controversial in his work because he was not denying the importance of psychiatry or other psy fields. I think in some moments he believed that if they had access to psychiatry and other kinds of therapy, maybe they wouldn't need this kind of ritual. But anyway, it's not a primitivism, it's not... it's authentic and creative way, cultural language for dealing with the suffering. I would like to show, this is also part of the visual ethnography. So you see that it's possible to see that it's a collective ritual, and it's not just women also, we have some cases, I think most of them are women, but we have some men also participating, okay. I would like to show a bit of the documentary, but I don't know if I will be possible to play the video. No. Oh, it is. No. That's okay. If it's not possible, then if someone is interested, I can send the video where they show the. Thank you so much.
We have 10 minutes, yes? So I can ask the speakers here to just turn their chairs around. I think we can put a couple of chairs out here. Are we still good?
Actually, could we stand? Because everybody needs to be here.
Right. That's out the screen, right. So across here, yeah. So we can put some chairs, yeah. Yeah. Meaning over this side.
So, this is for you.
That's me, yeah.
This is for them.
Yeah. Is that good? Okay, so thank you so much. We have a few minutes for some questions. We have quite a lineup.
Please, I know it's uncomfortable, but if you could stand in front of the screen.
Yeah.
So we can see.
Yeah, please. So let's just see. Maybe Malgosh at the back, please. Yeah, go. Yeah. Just speak. Yeah.
Team and also to the Tiago who was talking about ethnopsychiatry. My name is Margaret. I am from Poland, Warsaw. I'm anthropologist, psychotraumatologist, and I see something that in the case of Australia, when you are talking about decolonization, already you can speak about the heritage you are proud of. And when you are talking from the Western point of view and traditional primitive culture, primitive, of course, folklore culture, we cannot still be proud of. We are still processing it. And this is how much we can learn from non-European countries according to perceive our own traditional heritage and art as something which could be an element of resilience. And that's why I'm so thank you that you are also bringing back this those research from beginning of 50s. I'm talking about it because right now we are in the situation we're working with Ukrainian war and trauma. And what we can observe right now that psychotraumatology, psychology, psychiatry is a topic of taboo and used to be a topic of taboo in Ukraine by years because of the communism. So we have a problem that what we recognize that methods which are sponsored by big NGOs, big Western organization, means classical psychology does not work. Ukrainian refugees do not trust classical psychotraumatology or psychological methods. They want to use traditional arts and traditional ceremonies and post-secular situation like praying as an element of their own autotherapy. Unfortunately, Western perspective does not sponsor it. So when we are going through guidelines in a big organization, it's not money for culture. It's only money for something which is professional skills, means classical psychology. So what I'm thinking right now, what we are really missing, and I'm talking from the even European Union Commission, because we are just opening next year a mental health institute in Kiev, and we need the guidelines, cross-cultural guidelines, including decolonial perspective in Europe, because the problem of the colonization is also a problem of Central Eastern Europe. And as a group, I see the potential to write a guidelines for the space holders and for the fundraisers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I may add a question to you, the Australian team. You talked about your ways for healing for historical trauma. And I'm interested, how much are you self-interested in other historical trauma and healing activities, for example, with the North American Indigenous? How much are you very much interested in what in particular, or is it so different because, yeah, you have your own cultures, you mentioned it, and why bothering about far away other groups?
Okay, so we are definitely interested in other cultures. We don't. So I think that what we're trying to say in our thing is that going to both the comments before is really about our students are coming in. We have to, because of the impacts of things like the stolen generation, the impacts of colonisation in our own country. Some of our own people have differing levels of understanding of culture. And so what we understand working in mental health, I've worked in mental health for 13 years within the Aboriginal Indigenous mental health space, is that what we know that having a good grounding in culture gives strength. So we teach our students Western-based psychology, the brain, life spectrum. I don't teach that stuff, so I teach culture. But we teach them the Western paradigms. But we have, because they're going to work in that third space. But what we do is we say to them, what you need to do is make sure that you still ground yourself in culture, because you're going to deal with people who have different levels of culture, and it's from a strength base, right? We build them up in the culture and the strength base, so that gives them the understanding. So we don't necessarily, and we use other examples. So someone was talking about the lady that was talking about dementia, and how we use a cultural lifespan cycle of First Nations people from Canada, which talks about how the infants and old people share a journey and they share their identity and they start together because it's in a circle, right? So as you get older, you start with the old people and the old people present the children to the community, and they guide that young person through their early stages of their life. So it's really important that we bring those other cultures in, especially from Aotearoa, which is our neighbours, New Zealand and Canada. But yeah, we definitely are interested in looking at that stuff and our students actually go looking for that stuff, because it's part of Curtin's sort of student graduate capabilities that they look at First Nations both here in Australia, but in the world globally. So they have to have that global perspective of First Nations people around the world as well.
Anyone else?
Thank you. It's a question for Tiago. I really enjoyed your presentation and wanted to ask you, you talked about specifically this kind of cultural ethnopsychiatry as being still kind of perhaps limited or in the margins in terms of psychiatry in Italy. But I was wondering, with the more kind of recent developments with like migrants and immigration in Italy, has it kind of experienced a resurgence?
Okay, thank you. Yes, indeed. I think most of the transcultural psychiatrists, they deal with, nowadays, even in Italy, they deal with immigrants, because I think it's the most obvious choice to deal with the cultural changes. But particularly, I think that the cultural changes is not just between countries, but also within the same country. We have this cultural plurality. So this is the problem of to create like global policies for health, for example. How you create, it's not just about immigrants, it's about even your country. People are so specific That's this is a challenge for mental health, I think, for psychiatry, for transcultural ethnopsychiatry. How we deal with this plurality, not just with immigrants, and that's true. They are the main target of ethnopsychiatry nowadays, but also how we deal with that within the country, the plurality of the subjectivity. How we deal with this.
Any more? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So my question regarding trauma and how we want to look for another like terminology or to look for trauma in more invisible form. So I'm just curious to ask, is like breaking out of this kind of Euro dominance of what trauma might entails, you reinforcing, you know, the violence or symbolic violence of how trauma is identified in our like modern days?
I'm not sure whether I got your question right. Sorry.
Yeah. So my question is like trying to see like forms of suffering in terms of trauma in Indonesian after independence is a way to reinforce also trauma, like as like more accepted term in our moral economy of nowadays world?
No, not at all. On the contrary, no. I always said I would like to write a book without the word trauma. That would be my starting point. But yeah, that's one of the challenges, to seek a kind of language which is different from the more medical inclined vocabulary and American Eurocentered views of the kind of clinical medical approach. There's one real good study on Vietnam, actually, with a very provoking title. I think it's something like "We Don't Have Trauma," which goes into the kind of hybrid ways of how Vietnamese in the post-conflict situation deal with what we would name trauma. So that is the direction I would like to take. Yeah, and there's probably more studies, but that's a real good one by what's her name? Baraknakis. It's a wonderful study. Yeah.
We will deal with this the same topic here at the conference in posters, and to give other names to what is usually called trauma. We will have it here at the conference.
Oh, great.
Okay, so I think we deserve maybe our 15 minutes. The speakers are around, and please engage, and we'll continue with the conversation. Yeah.